The cafe had only just opened when David pushed through the door, Ranger close at his side, brushing his leg as they entered. The bell above the frame gave a weary chime, and the smell of fresh coffee and bread rolled out in a soft, welcoming wave. David gave Sarah a small nod from the counter, the kind regulars give without needing words. He almost didn't notice the girl outside on the steps. She sat turned partly away from the street, a wet cloth folded neatly in her hands like a little flag of surrender. 11, maybe, ponytail limp, knees scraped, a pile of clean menus stacked beside her. Through the glass, her reflection looked faint, like a ghost against daylight. Ranger spotted her first. The shepherd edged back toward the door, nose twitching, tail slowly swaying low. The girl didn't move when he approached. She only blinked, and the dog rested his chin carefully on her wrist, something he usually did with men shaken from nightmares. "Lily," Sarah's voice floated gently from behind the counter. "You can leave those. I'll finish." There was practiced care in her tone, like someone who knew how to speak without scaring away a bird. David stepped to the threshold. "You work here sometimes?" Lily gave a quick nod, eyes following two schoolkids hurrying past in crisp blue and white uniforms. Her jaw tightened. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "when I'm allowed." Ranger sank to the step beside her, front paws lined up neatly, ears soft. David noticed the rag in her hands wasn't just damp. Her fingertips were red from hot water. "Shouldn't you be in school?" he asked gently. Her gaze stayed fixed on the sidewalk. "I don't go." The words sounded rehearsed, small. "Dad says it doesn't matter." A bus groaned at the corner before rolling on. Inside, the order bell chimed. Ranger looked to David as if asking something unspoken. David lowered himself onto the edge of the step. "Want to tell me why?" Lily swallowed. "It's complicated." The dog stayed very still, holding the silence open until she was ready. Sarah came over with 2 steaming mugs, coffee for David, and hot cocoa with whipped cream for Lily. She set down a buttered roll too. "On the house," she said softly. "You've helped enough already." Lily hovered awkwardly by the booth until Ranger nudged her knee. She slid onto the seat, clutching the cocoa as if its warmth could keep her steady. David cupped his mug but kept quiet, letting the hush make room for her. The diner's rhythm carried on around them. The hiss of the griddle, forks against plates, a radio murmuring old hits. In the window's reflection, 3 figures appeared faintly together. A soldier, a dog, and a child who seemed to be clinging to the light just to stay upright. "She's here most days," Sarah murmured, wiping at a spotless counter. "Helps with tables, stacks menus, clears cups. Sometimes I give her a sandwich or pie. She never asks, just works." At being noticed, Lily's shoulders twitched, almost like a flinch. "I like helping," she said softly. "Keeps me busy." "Busy from what?" David asked. Her eyes stayed on the melting whipped cream. "From thinking." Ranger slid down at her feet, chin resting on her shoes, tail tapping once against the vinyl. "Do you want to be in school, Lily?" David asked, voice steady. The answer came without pause. "More than anything." "What's stopping you?" Her lips pressed thin, color rising in her cheeks. "It's not about money." "Not really." She searched for a word, then said, "It's complicated." Over the rims of their cups, Sarah and David shared a quiet look. They both measured the weight of what she hadn't said. Ranger blinked slowly at Lily, patient as stone. Outside, the crosswalk bell rang, and a stream of children in uniforms flowed past like a current. Lily sat on the bank, forbidden from joining them. That evening, the air hung damp with salt and exhaust when David offered to walk her home. She hesitated, biting her lip, but when Ranger trotted a step ahead like he already knew the way, she nodded. The street they turned down was narrow, lined with houses pressed shoulder to shoulder. Lily's looked picture-perfect, fresh paint, trimmed hedges, a warm porch light glowing. From the sidewalk, it could have been any family's home. The door opened before she touched the handle. A woman in her 30s stood there, apron dusted with flour. Her smile was tight, her eyes quick and sharp. "You must be the man from the diner," she said, eyes skipping past David to Lily. "Has she been bothering you?" "She hasn't bothered me," David answered evenly. Ranger moved between Lily and the doorway, tail stiff, ears tilted forward. The woman's mouth thinned. "She hates school. Too lazy, always making excuses. Easier to have her here helping." Her last word cut the air like a knife, as though Lily were more tool than child. Lily shrank back. Ranger gave a low rumble that vibrated through the porch. "Thanks for walking her," the woman said briskly, swinging the door wider. "We're fine now." David's eyes flicked across the scene inside. Perfect curtains, polished shoes, picture frames lined up just right. Everything looked whole. Yet the girl beside him trembled, and the dog bristled like a warning flare. David tipped his cap. "Evening, ma'am." As the door closed, Ranger's amber eyes stayed fixed on the gap until it clicked shut. On the walk back, David said nothing. He didn't need to. The unease in his chest told him what the dog already knew. Something was very wrong behind that shining porch light. The next morning, the cafe filled with the smell of cinnamon rolls and hot coffee. But David's eyes went straight to the girl. Lily balanced on a stool too tall for her. Stacking glasses, she had dried herself. Her thin arms shook, but she didn't complain. Sarah bustled out of the kitchen, flour smudged on her cheek. "I tell her she doesn't have to, but she insists, says it makes her feel useful." Her voice carried a mix of fondness and worry. Ranger patted over, gave Lily a gentle nudge with his head, then settled beside her. She set the glasses down carefully before crouching to press her forehead against his. For a brief moment, she looked less like a worker and more like a child allowed to breathe. David slid into his usual booth. "Morning, Lily. No school today." Her hands stilled, fingers tightening around a dish towel. "I don't go," she murmured, the words almost drowned beneath the hum of the diner. He leaned forward, his tone firm but gentle. "You told me it was complicated. What does that mean?" Her shoulders trembled, and she sank onto the stool. Ranger's solid frame pressed against her knees as though to shield her. Then the words tumbled out in a rush. "I have to stay home. I take care of my little brother." Lily's voice cracked. "She says I don't need school. Says girls like me don't deserve it." Tears splattered the towel on her lap. Ranger lifted his head, brushed her chin with his nose, and let out a soft whine that filled the silence Sarah dared not break. David's grip tightened on his cup. He had listened to confessions whispered in desert tents, mumbled in barracks, gasped in hospital wards, but nothing cut deeper than a child admitting her future was being taken from her in a quiet corner booth. The next afternoon, David walked Lily Street again, but this time he stopped at the fence next door. An old woman sat on a weathered chair, knitting with twig-thin fingers. The neighbors called her Miss Annie, though her name was Mrs. Howard. Ranger trotted ahead, sniffed the marigolds, then stretched out at her feet as though he'd belonged there all along. Annie chuckled, scratching behind his ears. "That dog knows good souls." David introduced himself carefully, steering the talk toward Lily. Annie's needles slowed, her sigh soft but heavy. "Poor thing," she said. "Her mama died when she was still tiny. Sweetest woman. Gone just like that. Her daddy remarried too fast, if you ask me." The needles clicked against each other. Since then, that child's been more housekeeper than daughter. David listened as Annie painted the picture. Mornings of cooking oatmeal for her baby brother, afternoons of laundry, nights rocking him to sleep while her stepmother watched TV. Annie lowered her voice. "And all the while that girl begs to go to school. Begs. I've heard her. Please, just let me try. But the woman waves her off. Says it's wasted on her." David's jaw tightened. Ranger lifted his head, ears pricked as though catching the sting of Annie's words. "She deserves better," Annie whispered. "You can see it, can't you? She's not lazy. She's invisible in her own house." David rose slowly, exhaling. He had seen soldiers broken by silence, men erased by neglect. Now he saw the same shadows gathering over a child. Ranger pressed into his leg, steady, as if urging, do something. By dusk, David stood again at Lily's porch. The light above hummed, spilling its sterile glow. Ranger stood square at his side, body taut, already reading the tension inside. After 2 knocks, Lily's father opened the door. A broad-shouldered man, worn down by years of labor, his eyes dull with fatigue. Behind him, the stepmother hovered, lips set in a hard line. "I need a word," David said, his voice carrying command softened by respect. They let him in. The living room was staged like a photograph. Cushions in perfect rows, a vase of plastic flowers, everything too neat. Lily perched on the sofa's edge, hands knotted tightly together. Her father cleared his throat. "I know what this is about. Lily's fine. We keep her home. It's easier. She helps." The stepmother cut in sharply. "She's lazy. School's wasted on her. Better she learns to be useful." Ranger surged forward, placing himself in front of Lily, chest broad, a warning growl humming in the quiet. David's eyes stayed fixed on the father. "You wore the same uniform I once did. You know what opportunity means. You know the cost when it's denied. Don't stand by while your daughter's future is stripped away." His voice grew rough with conviction. Shame flickered across the man's face, but the stepmother's glare held him frozen. "It's complicated," he muttered. "No," David said, the single word sharp as steel. "It's cowardice." The silence that followed was crushing. The only sound was Ranger's steady growl, a heartbeat refusing to let Lily be unprotected any longer. Later that night, David asked to speak with Lily's father alone. They stood in the dim kitchen, the only light a weak bulb swaying above the sink. Ranger stretched across the doorway, body firm, keeping the stepmother from slipping past. The father leaned against the counter, calloused hands rough against the edge, eyes fixed on a crack in the worn linoleum. "You don't understand," he muttered. "I work all week, sometimes 2 jobs. I can't fight her too. If I push, the whole house falls apart." David kept his tone steady. "So instead, you let your daughter carry the weight?" The man flinched. "I know she wants school. I hear her crying for it at night. But I'm behind on rent. I owe too much. My wife says Lily's better off here, helping. At least she's safe." "Safe?" David's voice sharpened. "Safe isn't being told you're worthless. Safe isn't being hidden away while your childhood is stolen." A sound came from the hallway. Lily stood barefoot, hair loose over her shoulders, eyes wide. She hadn't meant to listen, but her expression showed she'd heard it all. "I don't want to be safe," she whispered, voice trembling but gaze locked on her father. "I just want to learn. I just want to read." Ranger pressed into her side, fur brushing her hand like a vow. Her father's mouth opened and shut, his face lined deeper by guilt. The truth in her plea stripped away his defenses. David stepped closer, calm but resolute. "You don't need to fight a war here. You just need to stand up once for her." The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was the sound of a man realizing that silence itself had been betrayal. The next morning, David sat at his booth in the corner cafe, coffee cooling beside a notepad. Ranger dozed at his feet, ears twitching whenever the door swung open. Sarah slid him a plate of eggs. "Planning another mission?" she asked softly. "In a way," he answered, pen scratching across the page. By noon, he had called an old contact at the Veterans Association and a community legal aid office. Both responded like soldiers rallying to a cause. The law was clear. Lily had the right to an education. Supplies would be covered by volunteers. A retired teacher even offered tutoring after hours. That evening, David returned to Lily's house, folder in hand. Ranger trotted ahead, tail high, already sensing a shift. Inside, Lily's father slumped at the table, worn down. The stepmother stood with arms crossed, mouth hard. David laid the papers down like evidence. "Here's the law, and here's a scholarship from people willing to stand behind Lily. She's going to school. We don't need charity," the stepmother snapped. David didn't blink. This isn't charity. This is her right. Refuse it, and you'll answer to more than me. The father stared at the papers, hand hovering. The room held only the sound of Ranger's steady breathing. Then at last, the pen moved across the page, leaving his signature behind. Lily gasped, both hands over her mouth. Ranger leapt to her side, tail beating the air like a drum. For the first time, her future had a door, and someone had finally unlocked it. The morning of her first day, Lily stood on the diner steps in a hand-me-down uniform too big for her small frame. The skirt brushed her shins, sleeves rolled at the cuffs, but her smile erased the awkwardness. She clutched a second-hand backpack like treasure. Sarah snapped a picture with her old phone, eyes misty. "Look at you," she whispered, "bright as a penny." David adjusted the straps of the bag with a soldier's precision. "Keep them snug. It'll help you stand tall." Ranger circled them, tail sweeping wide arcs, then fell into step beside Lily as she walked toward the school. People watched as the shepherd trotted proudly at her side, but no one dared stop them. At the gate, Lily hesitated. Beyond it, children ran and shouted, their laughter rising with the thud of bouncing balls. Clusters of uniforms mingled, friendships already formed. Her smile faltered. "I'm too late," she whispered. "They already know more than me." David crouched, his eyes level with hers. "You're not late. You're just starting with a heavier pack. But that doesn't mean you won't finish strong." Ranger leaned against her, amber eyes urging her forward. With a shaky breath, she stepped inside. The bell rang, swallowing her into the tide of students. After school, she came straight back to the cafe. Notebooks spilled from her bag, pages crowded with new letters. She stacked dishes for Sarah with one hand, pencil still clutched in the other. In the hum of clattering plates and frying pans, the child who had once only looked in from the outside was now part of the story she'd longed to join. 3 weeks later, the bell over the door jingled, and Lily burst inside, cheeks flushed from the cold. She held up a sheet of paper, waving it like a banner. "Mr. David, look, I got a perfect score." David lowered his coffee, a rare smile tugging at his face. He unfolded the paper as though it were a medal, not a math test. The red circle at the top shone brighter than any commendation he'd ever earned. Sarah clapped from behind the counter, flour dusting her hands. "Well done, sweetheart." Regulars lifted their mugs in salute. Applause and laughter filled the little cafe. Ranger bounded over, paws clicking, tail thrashing with joy. Lily dropped to her knees, arms wrapped tight around his neck. The shepherd pressed against her, eyes gleaming, panting in delight, as though he too knew the victory. David watched the girl and the dog framed in the golden light of late afternoon, something long locked in his chest beginning to loosen. For years, he had carried the war inside him, walking as though life had nothing left to give. But here, in the joy of a child and the faithfulness of a dog, he felt himself come alive again. Perhaps he hadn't saved Lily alone. Perhaps Lily and Ranger had saved him, too. And the story didn't close on despair, but on truth. Education is more than lessons. It is dignity. It is hope. It is the right to dream. And sometimes it takes the fragile courage of a child and the fierce loyalty of a dog to remind us what matters most.